If all the directors could take their seats, we'll get underway. Sorry, we're already late, so that was my fault, but now I gotta get going. That's exactly what I was doing. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Regional Services meeting for Wednesday, October 23rd, 2019. Before we begin, I'd like to recognize that this meeting is taking place on the traditional and unceded territories of the Coast Salish people. And with that, we'll get underway. Are there any additions or changes to the agenda this morning? Ms. Legault.
I have no changes.
Thank you. So the first thing on our plate this morning is the approval of the agenda. Moved by Director Atkins, seconded by Director Yanni DiNardo. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Motion carries. Number 2, adoption of minutes. Sorry, I'm so used to my council where I read everything out. Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The first item is the adoption of the Regional Services Committee meeting minutes of August 28th, 2019.
Moved by Director Marsh, seconded by Director Yanni DiNardo. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Motion carries. Public input period. You'll see the public input policy up on the board. We've got 15 minutes, 3 minutes per speaker on items on the agenda. As long as they're not subject of a public hearing, please come forward. And just push the little talk button on the mic there and make sure the light's on and you're good to go. There you go. Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you, Honorable Mr. Stone. I don't
just
do this
Mr.
much.
Chair
I'm
is
sorry,
fine.
Mr. Chair.
You can call me Carl, but that would be wrong.
I'm here on behalf of the Shawnigan Basin Society asking for their budget to be approved. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Elizabeth Brennan. I'm right now dealing with the situation with the landfill beside me, and my lead my well is contaminated very high in lead. The Shawnigan Basin Society has been a huge help, and honestly, I would not be where I am with getting the situation resolved without them. So without their knowledge, time, understanding of legislation, and who to talk to, their contacts, I think without having them, I know I wouldn't be where I am. It certainly would take a lot longer to get there. So I just want to really put it out there that in the Cowichan Regional District, period, I think they're an important resource to have. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hi. I'm Stephanie Brennan. I'm also here to support the Shawnigan Basin Society. I'm a university student and I'm doing a lot of chemistry, and I know how expensive chem is, so I know that the budget would really help them. And like my mom said, they've been really great. They go above and beyond. And they even went on a 2-hour hike with us, and they did amazing, a lot better than even some of us did. So they're really great, and they're a really big help. So I think they should get their budget approved.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. Oh, good morning, Mr. Chair.
Good morning, Mr. Evans.
Mr. Chair, last night I was at the budget meeting at Kerry Park, and I must say that the budget meeting was A1, run very professionally. All the charts were up. You couldn't want anything better. The public was allowed to talk to the directors on the floor, which was great. And they were allowed to participate in the budget in that they could put little smiley faces on something they liked and little snarly faces and other things. And I was going around looking at all these boards with lots of comments on that didn't really pertain to the CBRD, like filling in potholes and things wrong with the roads. And I think that really we're missing a golden opportunity in not having at least 3/4 of an hour after a situation like that to make sort of a hybrid public meeting, open house, where the directors could answer some of the questions that are put up on these boards with the little pasties and the snarly faces and smiley faces, and explain to the public that roads in the electoral areas are not handled by CVRD. So in the future, I would like to see the same thing, and congratulations to the financial department. That's the best I've seen. And hopefully we can have a bit of a public period after. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Morning, Mr. Harriott.
Good morning. Today I can wear my glasses because I had a computer meltdown and it wouldn't print, so I'm winging it. So I'm referring again to the discussion that will be later on the ongoing water monitoring of the nitrate contamination in the Fisher Road area. At the August Regional Services Committee meeting, a motion was put forward to that you would meet with reps from the MOE, and maybe something would come of that. And I got to be honest, I was part skeptical and part optimistic that something would come of it. So a meeting was supposedly scheduled for the UBCM with the Ministry of Environment. That didn't happen. Instead, they met with the Ministry of rep from the Ministry of Finance, which knew nothing about the issue, and I'm not sure much came of that. So that was disappointing. And it was going to be Ministry of Environment, and then it was going to be Ministry of Housing for some reason, and then it was the Ministry of Finance. But since then, correspondence has come from Ted Zimmerman, Executive Director of the, I believe it's Water Protection and Sustainability, and there was a concerning statement in his correspondence where he said, we are encouraged that the nitrate levels have stabilized and are within drinking water standards, when in fact, all the testing has shown consistently over the last 6 years that 3 of the 4 test wells are well above drinking water standards. So I'm concerned where that information came from and why they have that information, and your own map show on the package that was sent out on the staff report that in fact those wells are not within drinking water standards. So that's a little bit concerning. The other point is we've spent months, if not years, arguing over responsibility, and I won't get into why I believe it's CVRD responsibility, but I can't help but think the time, energy, and costs that we have expended arguing and being creatively avoiding responsibility, we could have done that testing annually or twice a year and been money ahead. We've spent time in reports and meetings and ongoing discussions, and we're back at the same place we started. At the August meeting, I challenged a statement by the CAO that the CVRD hadn't refused testing, and I didn't get a question during the question period. After the meeting, Mr. Carruthers was kind enough, he came down and he actually clarified that his statement was referring to the period only from May of 2018 forward. He confirmed with me that the CVRD had refused testing for that 3.5-year period between 2014 and 2018. So I wasn't incorrect on that.
Mr. Harry, your time is up. I'll let you finish real quick.
One more point. So with that 3.5-year period of refusal, despite requests from the community, we've now gone 5 years where we've tested the water once, and I don't think that's appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else who would like to give input this morning? Seeing nobody else coming to the mic, we will move on. Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next item is delegations. Item D1 is Cliff Evans from the Shawnigan Basin Society regarding with a report including an annual and 5-year budget plan.
You don't look like Mr. Evans.
I was going to say I'm a younger version of Cliff, but I'm Dave Munday. I'm the president of the Shawnigan Basin Society. And
good morning, Dave.
Good morning. I've got to get a PowerPoint up here, so
we'll give you a moment to get that up. If this, there you go.
Oh, there we go.
Don't even need IT help. You got a job, or? Welcome, and take it away. Would you prefer we save questions for the end?
Probably in the sake of brevity,
Okay.
this presentation may go beyond the 10 minutes. I'll try to keep it to that. But,
Well, we'll keep our questions to the end to not eat into your time, so if the directors could just take notes as we go.
Okay, and I just wanted to preface the presentation to identify our 5-year plan, which this presentation reflects. So I believe the 5-year plan is in the hands of the directors. Now, if I can just figure out how to move the slides forward. So this 5-year plan then covers the period 2019 to 2024.
Just use the right arrow on the keyboard, should get you to the next slide.
Not this one.
No, just on the keyboard there, the right arrow, bottom right-hand corner, should get you to the next slide. No?
I'm hitting it. Oh, I guess I gotta use the mouse and hit that, right?
Right there.
Okay,
Right there. Okay, there we go.
there we go.
All right, so just as a bit of background, the Shawnigan Basin Society, to let you know I've been president for about a year, so there's a lot of history that predates me. So the Basin Society was established in 2012, as the slide indicates, and it was through the Shawnigan Roundtable discussions. The mission, I'll get into more of our objectives later in the presentation, but simply it's to protect and secure long-term health and safety of the Shawnigan Lake Community Watershed, and specifically in the South Cowichan region generally. A lot of our new directors are located in other areas other than Shawnigan Lake, and we've tended to enlarge our area of influence. So we were funded under Function 488, which was zero balanced in 2019. And remains that way. There's a community support for the Basin Society. This year's been one of reorganization. We've gone to the public and raised, as it indicates, over $15,000. We have 70 new members. We've got donations of computer equipment, but we're still looking for a stable budget so that we can get on with what we are doing or intending to do. So 2019 saw Dr. Bruce Fraser. He was previous president, resign. I'm now the president. We also at the time had an executive director working for, she was the one paid employee of the Basin Society, and we did not renew her contract. We have a bunch of new members as directors in the Basin Society. Again, a lot of them are very science-based, and that is what the society is put together for. And there's considerable contemplation and discussion where we are going and how best to serve the community. So that discussion is culminated in this 5-year plan. So we feel that we've now refocused the Basin Society, and we're ready to move forward. Looking at past accomplishments, one of the premium accomplishments is the Silva Ecosystem Consultants Report. Herb Hammond is a specialist, an eco-forester, and this study that we've had done for the Shawnigan Basin is probably one of the premier studies, certainly on Vancouver Island, if not in BC. It gives us a recipe for moving forward against climate change and how we can maintain the ecosystem function at a landscape level. We've funded actually Coxsila Watershed Society to produce a similar plan for that watershed. And we've actually supported studies. This one I'll refer to as Miss Alvarez because I can't do her entire name, but she studied the vegetative changes in the watershed, and there's a report on our website related to that study. And we've established, in addition to the professionals that are part of that are directors of the society, we have a ecological design panel. So that consists of a number of specialists that range from ecologists through water resource engineers and support the Basin Society in our objectives. One of the fellows in the panel, Dave Polster, he's, by the way, I'm a registered professional biologist, as is Dave Polster. And his specialty area is restoration. So there's examples, pictures of some of the restoration work that the basin conducted. I believe that was in 2016. And so far we've completed 4 restoration projects in the Shawnigan Lake area. So we've also had a working collaboration with Timber West, now Mosaic, and we've done a mapping, both community mapping and Shawnigan Basin biophysical mapping to support the ecological-based studies that we're undertaking. Dr. Linda Gregory is part of our director of the Basin Society. She's produced a water quality summary for Shawnigan Lake, and that serves as a baseline going forward for additional water studies that the Basin Society is intending to do. Miss Jenny Berg, a biologist, did mapping of all the foreshore. This is looking at the function of the riparian area along the shore. And we've also done surveys of Eurasian water milfoil. That's one of the major problems in Shawnigan Lake. It's an invasive species, and the more we know about it, the more we'll be able to control it in the future. We have that just refers to information on our website there. You can see on the right here that we've done mapping of the milfoil presence in the lake. We worked with the this poster here is by the Invasive Species Council of British Columbia, and actually there'll be new signage coming to Shawnigan Lake in 2020 from that organization. So looking at the current board, now that we've done our 5-year plan, these are the professions that are represented by the directors. There's 14 directors in the Shawnigan Basin Society, as well as 1 administrative support person. So you can see that it's a varied, we cover agriculture, biology, engineering, a lot of business people involved as well. So this in green is really the essence of what the Basin Society is about. It's governed by the idea that one of the most powerful ways to cope with the upcoming changes in our climate is to restore ecological balance. So it's a very easy thing to state, but it's not a very easy thing to accomplish. Under the general objectives, there's 10 points there that I'll let you just read rather than me reading them. But these are the steps, the general steps that we're going to take to assist in being prepared for climate change.
So just let you know, you have about 2 minutes left.
Mm-hmm. That's why I didn't read them.
We've read them.
Good. Yeah. Well, there's the other 5. So it's really looking at the details of everything from invasive species. We are very interested, as I said, it's generalized beyond Area B. We're looking at aquifers. Really, it's the southern sector, so areas A, B, and C, where we're interested in the flow of water to and from. So these get into more specifics about how we're going to be doing the monitoring, and I'll leave it to you to review those. It's really just looking in detail. We've got detailed proposals for doing water quality analysis, sediment quality analysis in both the upper watershed, because we are concerned about activities in the upper watershed related to contamination, and also the lake inflows and outflows. So these are some of the collaborations that we have underway. We do, if you look at the 5-year plan, we have a letter of interest from the Malahat Nation. They're working with the Shawnigan Basin Society. Also, we have a memorandum of understanding with with Mosaic, who's providing over a course of the 5-year MOU. They'll provide us with $10,000. So,
Do you need a couple more minutes?
I just need a couple
Yeah.
more minutes.
Move
yeah.
to extend.
Okay.
Moved by Director Morrison, seconded by
I
Director
warned
Staples.
you it might be a little.
Yeah,
even
no,
without-
we were ready. All those in
Okay.
favor? Opposed? None opposed, motion carries. Please continue.
Thank you. Okay. And these are some other collaborations, more specifically with the CVRD. We're working with your community technical advisory groups, both for the Drinking Water and Watershed Strategic Initiative and the South Sector Liquid Waste Management Plan. So we are prepared to and trying to help with the achievements of those objectives. We also, recently we had the Think Shawnigan initiative. We were present there and provided input to the designers. And also, one of our supporters here, we've been dealing with soil bylaw officers and soil dumping, and we continue to sort of carry that banner. So, in summary, then, this Basin Society, it provides a valuable public service. It supports the CVRD, and our budget request is really 2 specific items. The first is we have an office in downtown Shawnigan Lake, which is used for community outreach programs. We have the office open 3 days a week. There is mapping and models there for the public to understand what's going on in the watershed. And that's approximately $32,000 to keep the doors open. The budget for the proposed water and sediment sampling, the only thing that isn't volunteer in this budget, there's 2 main items. One is the analytical cost for the samples that we take, and the other is for an instrument that we need to carry forward with monitoring that has previously been conducted by MOE, and it's called a YSI Pro DSS multimeter, and it's a multi-probe meter that allows us to do profiling in deep locations in the lake. And once we have it, I mean, it's a $16,000 expenditure, but it would be available not only to our people, but we would make it available in the CVRD for those types of investigations. So there we go. Volunteers, we estimate roughly $75,000 worth of annual volunteer work in kind, I guess you would say. And the members of the board, there's 3 of us specifically that have a lot of experience in writing proposals, and we intend to bring money into the CVRD that wouldn't otherwise be here through grant programs. So I'll wrap it at that. Sorry I was a little over, but.
No, thank you very much. I'll give just one moment here. I'm going to start my speakers list. Director Wilson, Marsh, Acton. So first of all, before I go to the speakers list, I want to thank you also for providing us good information in advance that allows the board to be well prepared. So when you say, you can read these things, most of us will have already read them. So I really do appreciate that. Sometimes we get delegations and they haven't provided us the materials, so we're flying blind. Yeah. And thank you for the work that you do as well. So obviously it's very important. I'll go to the speakers list now. First I have Director Wilson, Marsh, then Acton. So Director Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Mundy. That was really very interesting, and thank you for all the good work that you guys do. I am fully supportive of what you're asking for here because my area is also involved, but one of the most important points that I've seen on your thing is the to monitor sites designated by MOE as contaminated in order to protect the public. That's
Correct,
one of the major things that I'm interested in as well, and there will be more discussion on this, but basically thank you and the members of your society for doing what you're doing.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Thank you. Director Marsh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Bundy. The first question I have is about the slide that shows the areas of the lake that have milfoil.
Correct.
Would you be able to bring that back up? Because I noticed on what I guess is the west side of the lake, maybe.
Yep. There it is.
So see that area well, the left, which I think is the east, actually, isn't it?
Well,
Anyway,
this is the west arm here.
the west
so
arm.
I
Okay,
think
so
this-
there's a large area there that doesn't appear to have any milfoil. Can you tell me what's beside that in terms of land?
Yeah, good question. This was put together prior to my involvement in the Basin Society.
I wonder if Mr. Evans might know.
Would Mr. Evans know? We're allowed to have 2 delegates.
Yes, the reason for that, there's rock there, or you can have docks. If the milfoil is covered or in deep water, it will not grow there. So
What part of the lake is that? Like, what is that? Housing? Is that the school?
That'd be Memory Island right there. So.
And in some of the bays where it's not so deep, you can see there'll be milfoil there. On the west arm, it is just plugged solid with milfoil, and we've been doing nanobubble tests there from June till September, and we found that it wasn't really successful where there's movement of water. And so
Just to preface that, nanobubble is an oxygen treatment.
Yeah, I'm aware of it. Quamachin Lake. Yeah.
So I'm sure Mr. Monday will explain all the things we tested for.
Thank you,
and
Mr.
It's
Evans.
a lot of work.
The other question I had,
Follow up?
yes, is under your proposed budget for your office,
Yes, correct.
how much of that is for the part-time assistant?
It's broken down in the 5-year plan,
Yeah, I forget though.
which I have here, but 15?
Thank
Yeah,
you very
about
much.
15,000.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Director Acton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, thank you, Mr. Monday, for coming today. And I'm really impressed with how much you guys have accomplished this year. And I'd love to have another conversation about how you raise so much money, because that's always something that the community is trying to do. So you figured out a great formula there. Also, I don't see any mention of the research team, because that is also a huge resource and has populated the new member side of the Basin Society. So is there still a working relationship with the members who have not come over from the research group?
Yeah, there is. The suggestion actually was that SRG might want to nest in the Basin Society. That was put forward by Dave Hutchinson because he's not a director, and he doesn't intend to be a director of the society, but he would be very interested in having a place, that we could work from, I guess, and have more regular contact, which, as you know, it's meetings get called rather ad hoc for the research group, so.
Right.
Yeah.
It's definitely like a way to, sorry, can I?
Supplemental?
We can talk about it tomorrow. We're meeting tomorrow. But, so yeah, supplemental. But there's all these community groups, and some have strengths in some areas, and then some have weaknesses in other areas. So it's just a good way to work together and use those, because, we have lots of groups that may not be so technical and doing the social media thing, and then other groups can help with that kind of thing too.
Yeah, no, that's our intention, to work with all.
I have nobody else. Oh, sorry, Director Taylor.
Thank you. I didn't join the list earlier. So I got to go back on the learning curve there. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Very good presentation. It's obvious you've been doing very good work. I guess my thought on it is this. It's good work. It needs funding. However, within the regional district, there are other areas that would be good to have this kind of work done. And I'm thinking of Cowichan Lake. I'm thinking of Stalking Lake. I'm thinking of the lake.
Holland.
Holland Lake, thank you. So if we as a board go ahead and support this funding for this activity here, are we prepared to be looking at funding for each other lake? For example, in the case of Stalking Lake, to my knowledge, we've done nothing of this yet, and yet it's the total source of water for Saltaire, and obviously would benefit from that analysis of the forest around the lake and the viability of that watershed. So are we willing to look at this? If we approve it now, are we willing to look at similar proposals coming from every other area, and if so, supporting them?
Thank you. So this is a specific service that's funded through the Shawnigan Lake. So I'm not sure Shawnigan Lake would want to pay for all those other lakes, but there is the water function that may be able to accomplish that. And I know on Holland Lake, and I believe on Stocking Lake, there is a degree of monitoring going on already because there are drinking water specifically as reservoirs, but again, we can talk about that. But in this specific case, it's funded through the Shawnigan Lake area through a specific Shawnigan function.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and I just add to, I think the drinking water and watershed protection strategy that is being put together now will take that integrated approach to all these water bodies.
What he said. Director Nicholson.
Thank you. That was I mean, I'm really impressed with Shawnigan and all the issues you have and how the community is really pulls together to address them. And that was a very comprehensive plan you have. My one small question is, you focus on milfoil, and I get that, but also broom. And I'm wondering where you stand on the Japanese knotweed, because that's the one that we're having a terrible problem with in the Cowichan and the Coxsila drainages.
Well, I mean, invasives are, in general, they would be on our radar. So the broom is, in the Shawnigan area anyway, is an easy target because you can tell when it blooms at where it is. The knotweed is, there's no reason why we wouldn't have volunteers involved in that eradication as well. I would agree with you. It's there's a few of them out there that are undesirable. And it's going to, climate change is going to enhance invasives over natural vegetation. So,
thank you. Did I miss anyone at the table? No? Thank you very much. Appreciate the comprehensive plan and the presentation. So thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item D2, Jane Kilthai, 1 Cowichan, with a presentation on the climate action petition for information.
Good morning, Jane and team.
So thank you very much for this opportunity to speak before the Regional Services Committee this morning. My name is Jane Kilthai, and I'm here representing the citizens group 1 Cowichan. With me today are Reverend Keith Simmons of Duncan United Church, local Cowichan Bay fisherman Guy Johnson, and grade 11 student Katya Bannister of the Earth Guardians Cowichan Valley. Together, we represent 4 of the 49 local businesses, churches, unions, and nonprofit groups that sent Cowichan Valley local governments a letter on July 3rd asking you to acknowledge the climate emergency we face and to take increased climate action. Scientific report after scientific report released over the past year underline how increasingly dire the situation is and how quickly we need to act. Hundreds of local governments across Canada have now declared climate emergencies and asked their staff to advise them on increased climate action, including 2 here in our region represented in this room. We're here at the Regional Services Committee because you have an environmental mandate. Today, we present you with this petition with over 1,800 names gathered locally asking you to make the climate to be climate leaders and make the Cowichan region a climate leader. I'll roll it up and give it to you later.
I appreciate the dramatic effect.
As local government, you can decide whether we continue to create more sprawling developments and more emissions, or whether we move to more compact, walkable communities. Land use decisions also affect the amount of carbon we store in our local trees, forests, and soils. Local governments also influence how ready we are for climate impacts such as droughts, floods, and fires with your decisions around local infrastructure, something that we are grateful that the CVRD is attending to. We are here on behalf of the petitioners to urge you to follow other Canadian towns, cities, and regional districts in formally acknowledging the climate emergency and directing staff to bring you options for stepping up climate action. My colleagues will speak to some more of the reasons why, not all of them, but some of them that are affecting us here in our community.
While you step up, I'll take the opportunity to let you know you have about 6.5 minutes left.
We're good.
There you go. So I'll have to be brief. I told my congregation on Sunday I was going to be brief, and they laughed. My name's Keith Simmons. I am from Duncan United Church, and I'm here to address you specifically on what's happening with the vulnerable folk among us. And I would just try to point out that as humans living on the land, I think we all have a responsibility to the land and to the generations to come. A responsibility we haven't really thought too much about in our culture and our society. We don't tend to be relational thinkers, we tend to be silo thinkers, and I think that's gotten us to where we are now. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to ask you to act urgently to address climate emergency. It is an emergency. Our region's already been affected by climate disruption. We just heard some things this morning. I appreciate the work that the CVRD is doing, has already done to address impacts, but I think we must do more, not only to mitigate the coming disruptions, but to address the conditions that create them, including reducing our footprint. The most vulnerable people amongst us are feeling the climate crunch. Many local people and ecosystems, for instance, dependent on salmon returns, have been feeling it for years. Beyond incalculable spiritual and identity impacts, a major source of nutrients being erased from our coastline, from our rivers. We live in a salmon forest and we don't have salmon left, not in the numbers that we used to. As our forests lose even more capacity, those who found sustenance and healing in nature must now turn to support programs. I don't really have any idea what the forest is going to do. Hopefully we'll be able to help. Herb Hammond is somebody who might help. Local support groups are stretched to capacity. In our church, the Homeless Awareness Day we had last week saw more people seeking help than ever. Food, clothing, hygiene supplies, and haircuts were received and appreciated. The lack of tents and tarps and sleeping bags was not. And so we are going to continue a drive for those items so that people who have nowhere to go and nowhere to stay dry in the increasing winter rains can at least have them. The people we saw were youthful and elderly, immigrant, Indigenous, low-wage workers, people living with disability, families, couples, and singles. They're friends and they're neighbors, and they've lived in this area for years, many of them for generations. As always, we will do everything that we can to offer support and care and nurture and protection to the vulnerable. But the truth is that as the cost of living rises, as rents go beyond people's ability to pay, as mental health breakdowns become more evident and more people are forced to live in precarious conditions, climate disruption is going to create even more untenable circumstances. So we're trying to handle the triage of those who are most harmed, but we can't address the causes on our own. For that, our hope is in you. Please provide the leadership that we need to chart a new course. We need you to do some of the practical things, like supporting access to appropriate housing in denser communities where people can access essentials like food and medical care without having to own a vehicle, as many of us do not already. This will reduce our footprint while creating neighborhoods where people can connect and care for one another. Help us to build a community in which every decision, including planning and zoning, starts with a question. The question should be, what will the eventual effect of this action be on the living world and all that depends upon her? In these days, perhaps it's the only question worth asking. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Just to update, 3 minutes left.
Okay. I've been a commercial fisherman all my working life. I'd like to acknowledge the work that the CVRD has done to start to deliver, to deal with climate change. But I want to share with you what we as fishermen are seeing on the front lines of this climate emergency. Some of you will remember the failure of the sockeye salmon run on the Fraser in 2009 that led to the Cohen inquiry. Well, this past sockeye salmon season was dramatically lower than even in 2009. It's the lowest on record. Sockeye runs in the far north failed. We had very low returns for most chum salmon runs up and down the coast. Scientists have been really quiet since then. We did not have fisheries on the majority of the coast, and to be really honest, I'm in shock. None of us saw this coming this year. This has been really devastating for coastal communities and First Nations. This is a whole food system, a whole ecosystem stumbling in a downward trend. Drought, the warm water off the west coast, underneath it all is climate disruption. We're emitting way too much greenhouse gases, heating up our atmosphere and oceans to the breaking point. My union, Unifor, the largest private sector union in the country that represents oil workers as well as fishermen, passed a motion this summer naming what's happening on our coast a climate disaster and demanding that government start to deal with climate change in a way that reflects its seriousness. And I think it's time for governments at all levels, including the CVRD, to do the same. One thing that was drilled into my head when I was a young fisherman was you prepare for open waters ahead of time, not when you're in the middle of a storm. I think as a society, we're rapidly approaching open waters, and the storms are already breaking down the ecosystems that we are a part of. Preparing means bringing down emissions locally as fast as we can, including the 72% of our emissions that are from vehicle traffic. Adapting to the ongoing damage is important, but it's not enough. We're asking the CVRD to use its land use planning and bylaw making powers to densify our settlements and to support reduced vehicle use and increase public transit. To reduce emissions, we need to make these changes now. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm just going to appeal to the board if someone would make a motion to extend. Director Morrison, seconded by Director Staples. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Motion carries. You are no longer rushed.
Thank you.
Welcome.
I appreciate it. And I have a bit of a cold right now, so I apologize for my voice. Hello, everyone. My name is Katia Bannister, and I am the youth member of the One Cowichan Delegation, a Cowichan Valley Earth Guardian, and a social justice and environmental activist. I am grateful for the opportunity to address your committee on behalf of Young Voices. 3 years ago, I understood the climate crisis as a concept, but not as a devastating reality. Today, I stand before you, a lifelong ecologist and an environmental activist of nearly a year. I am a daughter, a granddaughter, a sister. When I was a child, it never seemed like a question that I would become an auntie, a mother, a grandmother. Now I'm questioning it. And now I understand what grave danger my generation is in. The decisions you make going forward will be your legacy, but they will be my inheritance. Your children's inheritance, your grandchildren's inheritance. You get to decide what you will leave behind and what you will pass on to us. You have a chance to create real change. Local council and board decisions play a critical role in determining what climate actions we take and how effectively we follow through on the climate actions needed to maintain the integrity of life here in the Cowichan Valley. It is critical to implement restorative action in the form of protecting our forests and watersheds and to create sustainable systems to grow our food, live in community together, and get where we need to go while reducing our greenhouse gas emissions in order to guarantee a livable future now and for generations to come. We urgently need you, the people with the power, to put in place an action plan to help mitigate climate change here in our valley. We need you to be positive role models in regard to climate justice. Youth want to be a part of the problem solving. We want to be included in decision-making regarding your climate action plans. We want to work towards intergenerational collaboration to find and implement solutions. What One Cowichan is asking, that you acknowledge the climate emergency we face and take practical action to create more compact, walkable communities served by fare, free public transportation to reduce emissions and make land use decisions that increase carbon storage in our trees and soils is a good place to start. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
So I'm just here for questions.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. That was a great way to end. It was very a good crescendo. Thank you very much. I will turn to the members of the board. If I can make a statement, because nobody's thrown their hands out yet. I know that people will want to speak to this. I especially appreciate the understanding of the actions that we can take that will actually make meaningful change around transportation, around land use, around the way that we design and build our neighborhoods. Because I think when we look at how we do our official community plans, how we build our transit systems, and how we tackle climate change, those are not only our responsibilities, but also some of the most meaningful impacts that we can actually make in terms of changing our communities to be climate partners, not climate destroyers. So I would appeal to the board that I think that regardless of the language that we use, I believe that everyone in this room is taking a look at the actions we can take through those lenses, at how we build better communities, because they're not only important climate action initiatives, they're also important financial considerations for the futures of our communities. Denser communities are more efficient to run. Better transportation systems lower the cost of living for everyone. And they actually can provide fiscal benefits, not to mention that the adaptation work that we have to do is already causing our budgets to grow around infrastructure. The more that we can mitigate, the more we can save over time. So I don't just appeal to the environmental lens, but we also have to look at it through a financial lens and understand that the action that we take can actually save us money, not only in the near term, but in the future as well. I did see a hand from Director Nicholson, so I'll go there first, and then Director Yanni DiNardo.
Thank you. I don't have a question. I'd like to make a motion, and I don't know when that's going to be appropriate.
I guess, you know, as I checked with Ms. Legault, it is the right of any member of the board to make a motion at any time, so it is completely in order. If you want to defer to let people have questions answered first, I'll grant that. So Director Yanni DiNardo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to the delegation and all of my friends. Yeah, I'd like to speak to what we have been doing, and I really like to speak to the young woman as well for I'm hoping that we were a positive role model in Area D when we did finish our official community plan 5 years ago with all of those things in our plan. So that was 5 years ago that we had completed that. So those are the things that we have been doing and encourage other communities to do that as well. And with our harmonization of our OCP, that will be directly what will be happening. So walkable cities, transit, all of that we've been working on quite a bit. So I thank you for your commitments.
Thank you, and don't be shy. The members of the delegation, please come in, because I think what all of you said was important, and there's no need to slink out the back for sure. I don't see any. Oh, Director Staples.
I was actually just hoping there would be a lineup of people to speak to you about what you said to us today, because while I recognize that there is a lot that we have been doing as a community, as the regional district, some of the earlier, I guess, leadership actions came from this board in the past around climate. And yet we find ourselves in a time where all of those things just haven't been enough. And so what I would like us to really focus the next 3 years that we have around this table is on making sure that what we're doing is enough. And that's going to require us to have really hard discussions that are going to face a lot of opposition at times. And but it's important not just for your future, but for our present. And I would like to thank, and if you could remind me of your name, please, sir, the man from Unifor? Guy Johnson. I'd like to thank you for bringing in that perspective, because I feel like oftentimes that's not what we get to hear at the board or at any government level, and not to minimize anyone else's contribution, but the importance of having people who are affected both economically and environmentally are important voices. And having many friends in my life who have been involved in fishing, and many fishing families in this valley, these are things that we hear over and over. And yet we tend to not hear from you. So thank you for coming forward, and I would encourage more of you to come forward to share your stories. And so, yes, I'm going to not make a motion. Director Nicholson has already identified that she has something that she would like to say, but know that this is taken seriously, and that this is something that at the board we're all well aware of. Our leadership role in this has changed substantially in the past couple of years, and unfortunately it's not something that people were able to articulate 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago when people started to bring this forward. And now we are, forced to articulate and find our way forward with all of us. So thank you.
Thank you. Before I go, Director Nicholson, do we have any other speakers? I have a couple notes that I wanted to share as well. Mr. Evans came in this morning and gave me some good advice, and he said when we're debating some of these issues, we need to focus on policy and not the emotion that can sometimes come from solid debate. And I would always, I know you were, talking about budget items, but I think it comes to these items as well, because as I said at the opening, these aren't things that are being asked of us that are outside of our purview. We're not being asked to shut down an oil and gas pipeline. We're asked to be focusing on how we do our land use. And Director Yanni DiNardo brought up a great point about the work that we can do through the harmonization process, and looking at some of the examples within some of the local area plans or even our municipal partners about how we're looking at the way we plan our communities to be more climate friendly. So there's a lot of work that we can do that isn't additional work, but it is actually work that we can do through the processes that we already have in place, including our strategic plan. I know that as we've worked on that, that's been a priority as well. So seeing no more speakers, I will go to Director Nicholson.
Thank you very much. I hope I don't choke up now. I really appreciate you coming to speak to us directly, because I think this is a really important issue, obviously. And it's amazing that so many people have signed on, and that we have we heard from you in late spring, and I think it's really time that we pull ourselves together on this issue. And I think what I'd like to move is that staff prepare a report in the context of the One Couch and checklist that outlines what we're doing and opportunities and options for additional substantive actions that will address the urgent climate crisis. So that's my motion. I think a report at this point would be very helpful in our deliberations regarding our strategic priority setting, which we have not finished yet. There's lots of room, and I think some really good solid information about climate related actions would be helpful in that. It would also be a really important tool for dialogue with the community. This issue isn't going to go away if we bury our heads, so it's really important that we engage and work with the community on this front in a more meaningful way. So yes, we've been doing some good things, but I think some of those things we need to speed up our actions on, and there are more things that we can do and should be doing. So
thank you.
That's my motion.
Director Nicholson, can you roll back and give me the motion part, though? I just wanted to get a seconder.
Oh, sorry.
And get the motion clear.
You don't want to hear me.
No, not all that. I do want to hear you, but I just want to get the motion
really
clear
choked up.
for Ms. Legault, and then we'll second it.
I did email it to you all. So
okay. You did?
Yes.
Okay, but can you just reread it, and then we'll see if we have a seconder.
I would move that staff prepare a report in the context of the One Couch and checklist that they sent us that outlines what we are doing and opportunities and options for additional substantive actions that will address the urgent climate crisis.
See a few seconders, I believe. I'll check Director Salmon because he was the slyest one to get it in there. Seconded by Director Salmon. Discussion. Director Staples.
And I would just like to say too that that I recognize that what's being asked is for us to declare a climate emergency, and so when this motion, when this report comes back, that is something that I would either like as part of the staff report or as part of moving this forward. I won't add it to this right now, but that is where, from my perspective and my voice at this table, where this motion is leading us.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call Director Kuhn.
I have some reservations about this. I do not like the indication that's being made here that if we don't sign up to this emergency motion, that the alternative we seem to have is further sprawl. I think the CVRD has done an excellent job so far of trying to adjust to whatever the climate change indicates. And I don't like the idea of an outside group coming to the CVRD and indicating with kind of a fair amount of pressure that we are supposed to do what their idea is of climate emergency. I've indicated once before to some of the members of that group, if they want to get involved in politics, they should stand for election. And the board is the one body that makes decisions. And while I take advice from other people, I do not like pressure. And this whole thing with the rollout of the names and all that, it looks good, but I just don't like it. I don't like that kind of handling of affairs, and I'm opposed to this motion.
Thank you. I have an extensive speakers list now. We're about to well, I would say that it's not always a good thing. Sometimes good governance is a motion gets moved and it was ready to be called the question, but now we have some speakers. So I've got Directors Marsh, Toporowski, Morrison. Have I missed anyone? Seeing none, I will continue. Director Marsh.
Yes, I think it would be good to call the question. I think it's a pretty straightforward question. We've known since June that the community is waiting for us to make a decision on this, and after this question, I actually have another motion.
Okay. Director Toporowski and then Director Morrison.
Thank you. I'll try not to choke up like Director Nicholson. We'll both be in the same canoe, so to speak. I just wanted to thank everybody for the delegation today and coming forward, and for the young lady as well, for using your voice and bringing it forward. We've been hearing in our community all about the changes that are happening in our climate. We can say whatever it is, climate change, climate whatever, but the choices that we're making and our decisions that we make at the tables and within our local governments, it is true what you're brought forward. I just wanted to say to everybody around the table, this isn't a one couch and thing. It's not a greenie thing. It's not a green thing. It's not a First Nations thing. It's community. It's a community issue. It's community decisions that we make at our table here that affect where we live. So don't shoot the messenger, so to speak. I'm just wanting to say that the CVRD has been moving towards the climate initiatives as well. And this is just to say that we're going to keep going in that direction. So I thank the staff and everybody here that have been working hard on this. But also we have to look at things like, Aaron, I thought you were reading some of my notes, some of the stuff that you said I agree with. And the decisions that we have to make, we have to take that into consideration, what we're deciding here at the tables, not here and at all the local levels. So I just, that's all I'll say. I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Thank you. Remember to turn your microphones off when you're not speaking. Thank you. I have Director Morrison, hopefully to close, and then we can call the question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Want to thank the delegation and Ms. Bannister for her remarks and some of her work that she's been doing in the community. I just want to, on this note, I'll make one comment about our budget meeting we had yesterday, and I think this is important. I walked up to one of our slides there, and a gentleman at the meeting, a member of the public, said, your core budget is fine, but just cancel all of these supplementals. And I don't know how we do the work that we need to do, that we need to continue to do, if we don't invest in some of the things that's being asked of us. So we talk about good governance. Our chair has a challenging day ahead. I appreciate the intent and the wording of the motion that Director Nicholson has brought forward, and I'll support it. It's for a report. It's to have more information for us to make good decisions, and I think that's good governance. I support that, and I'm comfortable with doing that. I'm a little uncomfortable about motions on the fly that may be subsequent to this when we may not be prepared for that. So I'm fully supportive of this resolution. I encourage my colleagues to support it as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Obviously, some very good work has been done here. When we're seeking a report of that nature, following along with your thoughts there and the thoughts from the public, what sort of a budget are we looking at for staff to do this report? How long would they take and that sort of thing? Thank you.
Through to Mr. Carruthers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd be reluctant to give a date at this point in time. This is a fairly extensive report. I would like to confer with my staff and to be able to report back to the committee as to when we would be able to provide that report. As the committee is aware, we are in the midst of a number of major initiatives, many of those climate change related. But I would commit to getting back to the committee promptly to give you a timeline as to when we can get that report back. I would like to review the checklist and understand the scope of what's being asked. There's a fair bit of information to be provided. Much of that we already have, and if we look through our much of our information that we provide around our corporate energy emissions and that sort of thing. So it's a matter of pulling that all together. So I again, Mr. Chair, I'd be reluctant to give a target date, but we will make it a priority to report back to the committee.
Thank you. I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Director Kuhn opposed. The motion carries. Director Marsh.
So, I'm just going to make the motion that we acknowledge that there is a climate emergency. I think our community and if I get a seconder, I'd like to speak to it.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Dealer's choice. I'll take Director Nicholson.
I said if I got a seconder, I'd like to speak to it.
Yeah, you got a seconder. I said there was multiple seconders, so I said okay. Dealer's choice. I picked Director Nicholson as the seconder. You are now
I thought
free.
You meant as the speaker. Sorry.
No.
May I speak?
Director Marsh.
Thank you very much. All I want to say is it's clear by the science that there is a climate emergency, and you know, the report is fine to come. I supported the report. I do agree with many of the speakers that we are doing things to address it, and I feel the urgency myself and from the members of our community without whom we would not be here. So if we didn't have people, we wouldn't have government. And so a significant portion of the people in this valley are concerned about it, and I was fine with the motion to wait until we had our strategic plan finalized, but you know, for whatever reason, a number of reasons, we haven't done that yet. And I just think we don't need the negative commentary if we don't say that we acknowledge there's a climate emergency. We just need to get to work, which we are doing. And as staff can give the report, we will show what we're doing. But I want to stand behind Katia Bannister and the Earth Guardians and the other adults in the community who are standing behind them. And I want to say out loud, as a region, we acknowledge that we're in a climate emergency. And I'll finish by saying, if we already didn't do that, we wouldn't be funding the watershed protection plan and so many more things. You want me? Oh, okay. So I don't understand the problem with acknowledging it or declaring it, whatever word you want. But I think we ought to do that and keep on doing the good work we're doing rather than tiptoe around and have people who could be doing other things with their time to help this emergency come and try and convince us yet again and yet again to do so.
Thank you. Before I go to Director Staples, I just want to kind of roll back to the wise advice I felt I got from Mr. Evans this morning, is to really keep the conversation elevated to the policy level. And I mean, I'm not trying to preach to anybody. I'm just trying to appeal to the board that I believe that a review of this request will actually show that we are recognizing the situation that we're in and we're acting not only appropriately, but the way that we should, and where we have deficiencies that we will take it. So I come at this from a, frankly, maybe a completely opposite perspective of Director Marsh, but we agree on the end of what we want the outcomes to see, what outcomes that we want to see. So I think that when we recognize it, and I could go into a litany of examples about how we're adapting and spending millions of dollars in our municipality dealing with adaptation issues around climate change to do with stream flows and culverts and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's many different lenses to look at this issue through, and I just don't believe that there's a disagreement around this table or with our staff on what needs to be done moving forward. So that's the appeal that I make and the plead that I have to the board. I'll go to Director Staples and then hopefully I can call the question.
Well, I just want to speak to I guess, and also to what Director Marsh brought up, but also now what our Chair Stone has brought up, because the city, we really struggled with this too. Do we do a report first or we do a declaration first? And we recognize that, you know, the declaration is important because we know that we're all doing things. This is not, making a declaration of this is not negating the fact that we're doing something. It doesn't negate that in any way. And we chose to declare the emergency and then get the report as to, you know, how we are going to deal with this and what does that actually mean. It doesn't change the fact that we're doing something. It doesn't not acknowledge it. It actually just lets everyone know that we are serious about the fact that we recognize that this is happening. And like Director Marsh said, naming something is sometimes more important, you know, not more important than doing something about it. I don't mean that, but it's important to name it so that we can stop having that conversation. You know, as I said at a meeting last week about something else, but along the similar lines, I feel kind of tired of having this conversation. So let's just name what it is and then move forward. So I support this motion, and I can actually say on behalf of the city of Duncan, who declared the emergency in July, that is something that our council has done. So very rarely do I get to speak on behalf of my council as well, but I feel confident in that because we have declared that at the city. Thank you.
Director Toporowski to close.
I was about to text you. Thank you, Chair.
Sometimes the chair just wants to call a question, you know?
I know. And I just wanted to add to what Director Staples said. I may not be here sitting in this chair next month, so this is really important for me to move forward because it's just a direction for whoever comes after we retire or don't get reelected, or, you know, it's just a direction for someone that may take over our positions and moving forward, and it's a direction.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Director Morrison to close.
For clarification, actually, through you to perhaps our parliamentarian, so I don't believe a committee of the board can declare or can make a proclamation. I think we have to recommend to the board that a proclamation happen.
Yeah.
We have policy in place at this point that the board doesn't declare, so is there going to be a requirement to waive our policy in order to do this? And will this be happening at this afternoon's board or a subsequent board meeting?
I'll put that through to Ms. Legault. I think I can answer it, but if I get it wrong, then she's going to have to answer it anyway. Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It wouldn't come forward to the board meeting this afternoon unless it was specifically requested by the committee. And I would have to do research on the board's policy on proclamations. I don't have that information at hand at the moment.
So the correct in order resolution that should be on the floor then would be recommend to the board that the CVRD declare a climate emergency. Okay, if it's good with the mover and the seconder, I'll make that change. Okay?
Can I say something?
I would love to call the question, but if you wish, you may.
I understand that you would.
I've been asked twice to call the question, so.
I know. So how North Cowichan, who also has a policy against declaring did it, was to say acknowledge. So I'm open to whatever the board decides when it comes up.
Thank you.
How to word it.
And I think that it will go to the board and they can have some more discussion there and we can get more insight on the policy. I believe it would require a motion to waive the policy as well, but we can approach that when it comes to the board. So now I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Director Kuhn opposed. The motion carries. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for your time. Yeah, and I was going to call a break at 11, but I think I'll call it now. And I just want to thank everyone who's running out of the room for their time. Just 5 more minutes. 5 minutes. So again, I'm going to remind directors that public should not be in the director's area. Thank you. If we can get back to our seats, I think we have a quorum here. We can resume. I think I'll wait for our CAO. That's why we're reconvening the meeting before it gets out of hand. All right, we're back. I'll turn it over to Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Chair. The next item is R1, report from the Economic Development Division regarding Cowichan Air Transport Feasibility Study, and this item's for information.
Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to introduce Pat Maloney, consultant with Dillon Consulting, and Robert Stitt, our local aviation consultant, who have worked together to produce a Cowichan Air Transport Feasibility Study. And with your permission, I'll turn it over to Ms. Maloney.
Thank you. Ms. Maloney, welcome. I believe we have about a 15-minute presentation.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and committee members and staff. I will try and keep it under 15 minutes for you.
Okay, so
I think busy day.
And for the preference, would you like questions held till the end? We can take notes and ask when you're done your presentation.
I think that would be great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Page down. Oh, no. This ended up being a PDF and not a PowerPoint, so I think I have to. Okay, there we go. Thank you very much. So we have completed the study. During our process, we used a number of methods to collect information and do the analysis. So we have done projections. We have done extensive engagement. We've looked at options and costs for an air transport facility, and looked at the economic formulas for trying to figure out if, in fact, it is viable. So the background that we looked at some of the regional trends. The region's growing, the communities are growing. Support for small, unique commercial ventures is very popular in the area. The whole of Vancouver Island is growing. We are in the middle of two larger airports, being Nanaimo and Victoria. The new hospital is under design and construction soon, hopefully. That the economic initiatives for the Cowichan Valley are looking at promoting tech industries, and ultimately just-in-time delivery has become a major market area with Amazon or whomever to deliver things in a very, very timely manner. That is very positive for air demand. One of the keys that we've looked at for all successful large projects in the region is partnerships as well, which we'll address. The stakeholder engagement that we conducted, and I think you've seen the PowerPoint, was quite extensive. What didn't get on this list was we also engaged BC Emergency Services, the 19-wing Canadian Armed Forces base in Comox, BC Ministry of Forests for the provincial air TAC program. We talked to Mosaic, who of course is a major landowner in the area, and there might be some idea that we focused a lot on some of the flying clubs and some of the other things, but what we're looking at is a registered aerodrome, and a registered aerodrome is mostly used by general aviation, not necessarily commercial airlines. So the regional policies, I'm not going to tell you your regional policies, but the idea of a new air transport facility in the region is supported in a lot of the policies, and if we take it a step further, not just air transport, but industrial, it also meets the requirements of the industrial land strategy, which identifies the fact that there is very little industrial land in the Cowichan Valley, and that the development of an air transport feasibility would include what we call groundside or industrial land, and would meet the needs for the industrial market as well. So with our findings and options, we took a look at, there's the current Butler Strip, which is privately owned, operated by the Flying Club. There's really no room for expansion. There's no security to maintain it as an airstrip. And then we looked at what really the region would benefit from. 2,500-foot paved runway would be nice, but it doesn't actually accommodate all of the emergency aircraft, emergency services aircraft. So we looked at a 3,500-foot paved runway. You could go a 35-foot gravel runway, but again, a lot of corporations, and if you are going to have any kind of helicopter operations as well, pavement is a preferred runway surface. And then ultimately we looked at 5,200 feet, which would be really above and beyond what the region could probably use. I mean, now you're talking sort of what Nanaimo has, and we felt that the optimum runway would be a 3,500-foot paved runway. The options, we looked at the costs, and airports aren't cheap, I'm sure you all know that. We looked at the cost for purchasing a site, building the runway, and the terminal and a potential helipad and the associated infrastructure. This sketch here is actually from Seashelt, and it shows how airports are really put together. So you have your air side, which has your hangars and runway access, and then you have your ground side, which is where you can have your industrial, whether it's warehousing. You can also have commercial, you can have hotel, you can have all of those things. And then there's the operations portion of the airport, which is the actual runway, taxiways, and the operations, navigation and weather uses at the airport. This sketch of Seashelt, they are looking to extend their airport, and their price tag is $10 million to extend their runway 1,000 feet and pave the whole, pave the existing and the new. So they're not a cheap operation. However, what we're finding is the spin-offs from airports are significant. One of the things we looked at were governance models. There are privately owned, privately operated airports, which is actually what Nanaimo is. There are publicly owned and privately operated. Castlegar is a situation where it's owned by the municipality but operated by a private company. And there are publicly owned and publicly operated. Our recommendation here is publicly owned and publicly operated, and that the land is never sold to people on the airport, that it is leased to them, that the revenues then come to the public organization that owns it and are then used to maintain the airport and support other economic initiatives. Funding options to build and maintain an airport are limited, but there is the BC Air Access Program. There have been several airports, small airports in BC that received over $1 million this year in grants. There's also the Airport Capital Assistance Program, which is a federal program and only provides funds to airports that have regularly scheduled passenger traffic. There are other grant programs through economic development, through tourism. As I said, partnerships is a huge opportunity. I've worked with many airports that have worked with partners to light runways, to extend runways, to build terminal buildings. There's also the operations and leases will provide funds to the airport, and taxation and general revenues will also provide revenue. So the following assumptions were used: that we are recommending a 3,500 foot paved runway. The parcel of land that should the board go forward to look at options, if there is to be an air transport facility, there should be at least 150, 160 acres of land that would accommodate the runway, plus sufficient land for industrial development that would pay leases and basically help pay for the airport. Have the airport classified as a registered aerodrome. So in aeronautic terms, under Transport Canada, and all airports are controlled under Transport Canada, if you have a registered aerodrome, your width and setbacks and transition areas are smaller than if you have a certified aerodrome, which would take regularly scheduled passenger flights. Now, there is also something where a registered aerodrome can have scheduled passenger flights come in if they go through a certain process to get approval, both of the airline and of the airport. For example, Texada Airport had aerodrome authorization. They had Katie Air flying in there as a regularly scheduled passenger airline, which both made them available to submit to the federal ACAP funding and as well provided a service to the residents. So, and we are recommending publicly owned and publicly operated as a governance model. One of the conversations we had with staff was the mandate for the Cowichan Valley Regional District does not include airport ownership and operation. That doesn't mean it can't. There are several regional districts who own and operate airports, and the Texada Airport at Quequot Regional District and the Tofino Airport are both owned and operated by regional districts. So the findings and the financial metrics, based on the assumptions, we believe that an air transport feasibility in the Cowichan Valley is feasible. However, it's unlikely there's going to be any positive cash flow for at least a 4 to 5 year period of time. It takes time to get it up and get it operational and start to get the lease payments. Over the life of the airport, the industrial land leasing will account for almost 94% of all the revenue. Airports themselves rarely pay for themselves. It's the other uses on the airport. And as long as that money stays into the airport will be a viable operation. The weighted average cost capital, now we're getting into the economic things that my young economist is not here, but basically we've taken a look at the existing price of industrial land and what will happen when the airport is operational and what industrial land prices would be. So the findings are the capital cost to construct a registered aerodrome in the Cowichan Valley is in excess of $20 million. To start it, the available funding would have to be at least $7 million to buy the property, survey it, and get a runway constructed. And then there would be additional debt to actually finish the airport. We've talked about how we could stage that as well. You could stage it by starting with the industrial development, which would pay leases, and then the runway could be constructed at a later date. But a lot of the industries would want to be there because there was going to be a runway, so it would have to be in pretty close tandem. Over the course of the life of, over the course of the life of the airport, there are definitely going to be additional costs and replacements and repairs, and that would be an ongoing investment with a return on investment of 3.1, and a net present value of $11 million. So again, airports themselves don't pay for themselves, but with the addition of the groundside industrial, it could be a viable operation. Sensitivity of the land prices. Right now, the land is at about industrial land is about $15 a square foot in square meter, and we could go to 9 and it would still be viable. And the idea is that, of course, the more industrial land you put on the market, it could drop the prices a little bit. You would make sure that you wouldn't want to put the land on too quickly. You would want to make sure that the prices stayed high, not higher, but stayed at the same value to make sure that everybody was not losing money and that you could still make the industrial component viable. Additional airport benefits. Airports are part of the transportation network, and while we're following a very excellent presentation on climate change, and while a lot of people might think that airports are not necessarily environmentally friendly, there are so many things that an airport benefits in terms of economic impact, public safety, and the whole airport network. And the previous presentation talked about floods and fires, and airports are often the sole place to usually a high ground and a place to then be able to bring in services, fly out injured people, bring in supplies. So the public safety element of an airport is pretty important. Statistics Canada calculates that for British Columbia, every dollar spent on air transportation gets about $1.94 in return in multiplier effect. So you can see all the airports in the region, and there might be a lot of people who say, oh, Nanaimo and Victoria are so close. However, there are, I believe it's 13 bridges or culverts crossing between Duncan and Nanaimo Airport. And if there's an earthquake and one of those is destroyed, your access is cut off. We all know the Malahat can be a challenge, and so that can also be, am I at my time? That can also be a challenge to get to for air transport. So airports are a network, and they all support and connect to each other. So, conclusion. While the analysis demonstrates that an airport would be feasible, it is conditional on finding the appropriate site close to a highway, that it be close and easily accessible to the new hospital site, that the $7 million capital startup is found somewhere, that there is community support, and that sufficient demand for industrial land is demonstrated. We believe that we have shown the demand for industrial land. The biggest challenge is going to be community support. And it's difficult because there will be concerns about noise and about the environment. Most of the airports that we showed you on the previous map exist and have been there for 50 or more years. This will be a situation we'll be looking at potentially building an airport in an area where people already live. It's one thing to say to somebody complaining about airport noise, well, you moved there 2 years ago, but the airport's been here for 54 years. It's a little bit different when we're looking at building something in a new area. So the next steps, if the board believes there is merit for the construction, and I understand this is not the decision-making board, this is the committee for the presentation, but if you believe there is merit, the next steps would be to investigate potential locations, to complete community engagement, and complete additional studies. So once you find a site that you think meets the other criterion, then you have to do the studies to determine whether or not it's actually suitable for an airport. And then get some more detailed costs. And that's the end of the presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. I have a bit of a speakers list. I have Director Wilson, Acton, Salmon, Taylor so far. Okay, Director Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know this is for information, but I have serious concerns about this. We've just had a presentation Cowichan and asking this board to declare a climate emergency, and yet we've got a presentation which is saying let's build a new airport with everything that goes with it, which I'm sure will contribute to the pollution that we're facing, and yet that aspect was minimized in the speak there. I'm sorry to say that, but it was. I pick up on the point of if we have an earthquake and culverts go down and bridges go down and all the rest of it, really? Of course they will. Does that mean that the airports are going to be left unscathed? Hardly. You need 150 to 160 acres of it, plus the industrial complex as well. We don't have that. I am in favour of a small helijet type thing which will bring the people in and which will act as an emergency point for fighting fires, but a full-scale thing like this, not when we have Nanaimo and not when we have Victoria, certainly not on a commercial scale. And I'm if this comes to the board for any kind of vote, I could not, in this present form, I couldn't support this at all.
Thank you. Director Acton. Oh, no, I had Director Acton, then Salmon, then Taylor, then Nicholson.
Okay, thank you. I have a question and possibly a comment. I'm curious if you looked at the relationship and the complement and also the, if it could be accentuated, the other airstrips that we have already. I think there was something about like a dozen. So what would we be adding to that?
The Butler's, in the region. I'm not sure. The Butler Strip is not viable in the long term. While they've been incredibly supportive to allow that strip to remain, they have plans to remove that gravel, and don't want government funding in there, and can't really guarantee many more than 5 years. Sorry, I'm going in the wrong direction.
Yes. Apparently, there's up to 12 or 13 different airstrips
Oh,
in
I
the
see what you're
region.
saying. Yep.
So did you look at the relationship to where they are? Do we, can they take over some of the uses? Can they, like, how do they complement this proposal? Or did you take them into consideration for the feasibility study?
Absolutely, we did take them into consideration, and the issue was that that for the last 40 years, there's been a group that have really felt that that this area needed an airport, more for general aviation, not to fly people to Toronto and Vegas, but for general aviation and to support local industry, and the issue is that as technology improves, that there are many airlines that are committed now to electric planes, which use renewable fuel, that don't have the same noise issues, that will still be able to serve the delivery and the emergency services that that the community would benefit from.
Thank you. Sorry, if you'd like to take the...
Director Acton, if you were talking about the smaller strips in the valley from the previous presentation, so those are small private grass strips. So
they could, in case of an emergency, they could be used. Like, so some of the uses that are highlighted on this feasibility study, those could be
not
delegated.
Really. They're essentially for small light airplanes. They wouldn't accommodate a helicopter on a medevac flight, or they don't have hard surfaces at any of them. So they're really backyard strips that people have started up over the years, and most of them are shut down now. So there's only Raven Field on Quamachin Lake, and then the Duncan Airstrip, and there's one in the southeast corner of the area too. But again, they're waterlogged in the winter and those sort of things. So they're not able contributors to this.
And if I could add to that, the fixed-wing aircraft that emergency services would like to use is the King Air 350, and that requires 3,500 feet to land and take off, and in most cases needs a much wider width than these local strips provide as well.
Thank you. Director Salmon.
Thank you. Just regarding climate change and emissions again, I know airports aren't, or air travel isn't usually associated with, it's usually associated with increasing emissions, but in this case with reduced driving to Nanaimo or Victoria airports, have you ever done any metrics to see whether what's the net effect?
Our economic analysis didn't go in that detail, but certainly there would be a reduction in both in vehicular traffic, potentially truck traffic, as well. The benefit would be that we could get emergency services. Very often what happens with emergency services, people are put in an ambulance and taken elsewhere, whereas they could be medevaced immediately from here.
Supplemental?
Could it be possible to get that kind of a study just for, in this case?
It could be done. It wasn't part of this budget or mandate, but we could certainly provide those estimates.
Might be helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you. I have Director Taylor, then Nicholson and Kuhn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. an interesting analysis. It took me by surprise. I've got a number of questions. What size of plane are you planning to use on these runways?
Well, the critical aircraft that the 3,500 feet would handle would be the King Air 350, which is the aircraft that is used for air medevac. And then anything smaller can so Otters, Cessnas.
What about corporate jets?
There, at 3,500 feet, there could be some, not a lot of choices. Yeah. But we did have in the report, there's a list of what could go. Did you want to add to that?
You might be able to fit a small citation in there or something like that, but the vision covered by this isn't really for jet
not the
transportation.
somewhat larger ones. Now, we've got an operator that has a racetrack in the Cowichan Valley, and he's attracting high wealth individuals. It would seem that if you're going to look at an airport, wouldn't you be looking at it in terms of providing an airport that would land those corporate jets of those individuals? Because I'm sure that many of them coming from across Canada, including the owner of that operation, would be interested in it. The other question I would have is, if your economics are as good as indicated by your report, wouldn't this appeal very much to the private sector, to private investors, such as the guy that built the racetrack? And the third one is, in your analysis, did you include the benefit of the commercial development, the flow of revenue from that, or is it just the air?
Go ahead. I just want to remind the directors this is information, and satisfying curiosities is to a degree. Yeah, but we'll just let her finish.
Excuse me, Chair.
Yeah.
It's not satisfying curiosity. It's looking at this from the perspective of what the CVRD might be called upon to look at.
I appreciate your perspective.
These are pretty important
Thank you.
questions.
Yeah, and we're going to let her answer. I was reminding the committee going forward that this is an information item on a very long agenda today, and for an alternate director to not have the previous reports available where some of these questions may have been answered. There was a mandate they were given to do, and that wasn't part of it. So through to the presenter.
Thank you. Through the chair. 3,500-foot paved runway will handle the King Air 350, but it also will handle Embraer, a couple of jets, a Citation, as well as one of the water tankers. So we have thought about what could happen, and we certainly looked at those jets as being the potential. And it's not just the racetrack, but there's also and I've forgotten the fellow's name who does the rock concerts and the big concerts. He was very interested in being able to flying people in as well. So I think, and if the region is looking at high tech, there will be demand for corporate jets to fly people in and out for that as well. I think that the commercial businesses that we're talking, I said industrial, but industrial commercial would be the 60 acres of an industrial park adjacent to the airport, and the spin-offs from that could be significant given employment and other revenues generated in. And as I said, I have a lot of examples of where private companies have partnered with airport operators. One airport I worked at, the corporation wanted to be able to fly their executives in the winter and have a full meeting day. But it was very dark in the morning and very dark in the afternoon, and the airport was not lit. And they went to the municipality and said, we would like this runway to be lighted. And they said, well, we don't have that money. So they purchased the lighting, the municipality installed it and maintained it. So there are all kinds of ways that also private investment can come into a public airport and help it operate as well. Did I answer all the questions?
Yeah, so
Thank you.
Your financial
Would you like a
analysis,
supplemental? Supplemental?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, just clarification. In your financial analysis, did you include the benefit stream from the commercial development of having shops, warehouses, whatever they might be?
Yes, we did. Yes, we did.
And so that generated the return.
Thank you.
Have you gone out to private
Mr.
investors?
Director Taylor, you direct the questions through the chair, and if you would like a supplemental, you can ask for another one. Thank you. One more supplemental, and then we'll resume the speakers list.
Thank you. Have you gone out to private investors?
Through the chair, we have spoken to many of the businesses in our engagement process. They all indicated that an airport would be an advantage. Nobody opened their checkbooks, but I do believe that there was interest.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Director Nicholson.
Thank you. The two areas that I think that we need to look at more closely, probably the first area would be, as Director Wilson mentioned, was the emergency services. I would really like to understand, I get that we're facing increasing wildfire risk, so forest fires are going to be more of a concern, and being able to provide support for that in the future. I guess I feel like I need a lot more information on emergency services and what they require and what is available elsewhere, and sort of the pros and cons or the trade-offs between different size facilities to meet emergency services needs specifically. And also, is the hospital not going to have a helijet or a helipad?
There is a helipad planned, but they need an alternate. That's the problem.
Yeah,
well,
so
that's the issue, and also they often prefer to use fixed-wing airplanes, and so we don't have the ability to transfer people direct from the hospital here. And Nanaimo is often shut down in certain parts of the year as well. So it's just part of a fabric of convenience and redundancy to be part of that network in terms of and. This all started by trying to put the industrial land together with an airport, and then things like public safety was seen as other benefits. So the revenue stream will come from the industrial land, and then we started to see some of the other benefits, which would be like complementing the hospital helipad.
Follow up?
Right, and I think that this is an excellent report. It's kind of laid the sort of foundation for thinking that way. I do think that as a board, our focus ought to be on the emergency services. And I think I need more information on that front to understand that better. And then the second area that, once that I was satisfied on that, I would like to understand better the governance models, because I felt that was a bit, I didn't quite end up necessarily where your recommendation was. But.
Thank you. Any commentary, or I can move on to our speakers list?
If there's, through the chair, if there's anything specific about the governance model, I did kind of skim over it a bit. The critical thing with publicly owned and publicly operated is that the public agency would then receive all of the revenue and be able to maintain the airport with that revenue. But the other thing too is, I think I said earlier, airports are actually controlled by Transport Canada. If you had an airport, well, you do have an airstrip in your region, you actually have no control over that whatsoever. Transport Canada regulates airports, land use, everything. And so if it was a privately owned airport, the governing bodies would have no control over what happened at that airport.
You may have incompatible uses.
May have very incompatible uses, and so it's one of the reasons why I have recommended that public ownership and operation would be the better option.
Thank you. Okay, Director Kuhn, then Director Acton to close. Director Kuhn to close.
You indicated in the study that the 3,500 foot strip would accommodate relatively smaller aircraft. Now, if we talk about emergencies, wouldn't you need larger aircraft to? Would the small ones be sufficient?
Yeah, the 3,500 strip would operate the air tanker groups that the BC Forest Service operates. It would allow the King Air to operate, which is the
air ambulance,
the fixed wing air ambulance. It would allow operation of the Cormorant helicopters, the big ones that fly out of Comox, which actually sub for the medevac flights under certain weather conditions. So that was how we ultimately arrived at this.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Seeing no further hands, I believe we can move on. I want to say thank you very much for all your work. And when it comes to the board can decide where we go from here. Thank you. Ms. Legault.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next item is R2, report from Recycling and Waste Management Division on groundwater monitoring of nitrate concentrations in the Fisher Road area. There's 5 options for consideration in the report, and the report is for direction.
Thank you. Do we have any sort of presentation or anything on this item? If not, we do have a report and many attachments for direction. I'll go to Director Wilson. Uh-oh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This report and the attachments became available at Friday lunchtime when the when everything was supposedly available. And I'm going to hold up something here, and I'll be holding up other bits and pieces again. When I read this report and the attachments, I didn't know whether to laugh hysterically or weep with sorrow at what's going on, the prevarication, the obstruction, and there it is right there. 15 years, 15,000 people who rely on Aquifer 197. There it is again. I'm going to hold it up and make sure that everybody sees this. The response that came through from the Ministry of Environment, from Mr. Zimmerman, was received on the 9th of October and wasn't shared with anyone until Friday, the 18th. I'd like to know why that was so. It wasn't shared with me as a professional or as a courtesy as the area director. As far as I know, it wasn't shared with the Cobble Hill Aquifer interagency group or anyone else. Why was the delay? And probably it's something to do with privacy, but that's not to say that it could not have been shared. The original request that went through from the CVRD for a meeting with the Ministry of Environment at UBCM, and I've got it here as well, more than once refers to the known nitrate contamination in the Fisher Road area of Cobble Hill, BC. The purpose of the study was to provide CHITG and the concerned Cobble Hill community with an update on the known nitrate contamination in the area and any potential risks to groundwater users. Here's the map right here, and it shows all 4 of the test wells. Well 1, above guideline. Well 3, above guideline. Fisher Road well, above guideline. Well 2, above guideline. And only number 4 is below the guideline. And yet, this message from Mr. Zimmerman says that we are encouraged to hear that nitrate levels have stabilized and are within drinking water standards. Where did that information come from, given that and that? That's a serious question. The Ministry of Environment seems to think that everything is stabilized and everything is below, when there's the attachment which says that it is not. They've also said, oh, we're not going to pay for that. Well, there's no surprise there, because that's exactly what I predicted would happen. The UBCM meeting did not happen. Everything else that's been promised or everything else that has been spoken about has not happened. We are in exactly the same position now as we were 2 years ago, as we were 15 years ago. We're talking about the health and well-being of 15,000 residents. And if I have to, I will hold that piece of paper up again. When are we going to do something to protect? And this is not just my area. We have other people here from the Kingbourne area who are having the same problems and sit on top of Aquifer 197. Aquifer 202 is at risk as well, and we're doing nothing. And it's all about funding. They're saying we can't afford this and we can't afford that. He's supposed to pay for it, she's supposed to pay for it. And there's all this finger pointing at other departments. And in the meantime, people could suffer because of this. I proposed a funding arrangement a few months ago, which went nowhere. We have a function, 530, in the budgets. Let's use some of that money to pay for it. If I have to use my grants and aid money, I will do it. I will spend what money I have to protect my community, while the rest of this organisation does nothing, continues to do nothing, and ignores a problem which we all know exists and which the Ministry of Environment says does not exist. I could go on a lot further, and I could certainly try and get something done here. What's the problem? Why is there so much procrastination? Why is there so much prevarication and obstruction? There is something seriously going on here, and nobody is prepared to do anything about it.
Thank you. Would you prepare to move one of the options?
Yeah.
Which one would that be?
Let me just look through it again. No, I have another. This was given to us.
Sorry, Director Wilson, I'll come back to you. We do have other people on the speakers list. Director Acton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wouldn't say that the CVRD is doing nothing. I think it is problematic for us, for the CVRD, to get the province to move on things. And you mentioned the Kingburn Association, and they were here today, and I just received their AGM notes from yesterday. And it's a good example of the community having to take things into their own hand. They have a list of every single department they've written letters to, and it's continuously things getting pointed into other directions. Like you said, no one wants to take the responsibility. So I think we do have to find a way to help our communities, and I think for this instance, we are at the point of, well, how are we going to help them? And I know that CVRD is usually in the advocate position, but at this point we are almost, we're out of time for that. The community wants to do something, and we're going to have examples like this coming forward more and more and more. And just like the Kingburn Association, they can't get anywhere with the province for the Agricultural Commission. They can't. Nobody wants to take any kind of responsibility as our communities are destroyed and water's put at risk. So, I think we should definitely support that community. And Kingburn community is also on that I believe the same aquifer. Their address is Cobble Hill, their area is Area B. So this is not about A, B, or C or what area. It's just about, well, how do we help people in our community? And if it's simply to give them the confidence that their water is not going to get further contaminated, then that's what we need to do.
Thank you. So hopefully we can entertain a motion. I don't know if one of the options that's outlined here would be a constructive way to move forward, but if Director Yanni DiNardo, and then if somebody has picked up on that one.
Well,
Director
I did.
Yanni DiNardo, then Nicholson, then if I don't get another speaker, I'll go back to Director Wilson, hopefully for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I see that there are options, and one of them would be to go to UBCM again, and that, to me, it seems like this is a broader picture. It's with the ministries, so we really need to advocate for that. I also contribute to Function 530, I believe. I'll double check with staff. Area D, and so we are also concerned, and I do realize that our staff here have done a lot of work, and I know that there has been all kinds of attention on this, and so I think it needs to be brought to a ministry very seriously for them to get on to the job at hand, because there are we have to work with what we have in our area and the issues that we actually have jurisdiction over, but we can be the advocate, and option one is one way.
Okay, I'll go to Director Nicholson.
Thank you. I think that the community really needs to have these wells sampled, and we can't wait for the ministry to come round, and I agree with Director Yanni DiNardo. We certainly need to continue to push them to do their job. But in the meantime, we have two options that are basically a minimal cost to the CVRD, option 2, or no cost to the CVRD, option 3. And the question that I have is that under both options, stakeholders feel that whoever does it is going to be biased. So if the CHID does it, there would be bias, and if the recycling place does it, there'll be bias. So I'm wondering if maybe we could do both options, and then people can't criticize us, or is this issue of bias not really that relevant? I would have to ask staff that, but.
So is that a question to staff?
Yeah, that's a question to staff.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think the issue of bias is difficult, and bias is held by individuals, and we would contemplate that this work would be done by registered qualified professionals. They're registered. The data gets uploaded to the provincial database immediately from the laboratory. I know there may be perspectives of bias from a professional perspective. That would be avoided through the use of registered professionals.
Thank you. Follow up?
So I would like to move option 3 and option 2, the basic suite of parameters, so that there is double sampling going on, so that we can do sort of a check on the basics.
Okay, so that's been moved. Do we have a seconder?
What's 2 numbers?
2 and 3. I don't see a seconder. Sorry? If you're seconding it, then you can speak to it. If we don't have a seconder, we don't have a motion. Okay, so we don't have a motion, unfortunately. I just, you know, and again, I'm sorry, I've got another speaker on the list, and then I'll come to you. It's just a point of information?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if Director Salmon is aware that he can second a motion that he doesn't necessarily support.
And that's why I said if he seconded it, he could speak to it, but. Yeah, we don't have a seconder yet. Is that to see if you want to second the option?
Isn't our whole conversation on the floor?
Not when a motion's been moved. If we don't have a seconder, the motion dies, and I'll go back to the speakers list.
Okay, I'll withdraw my motion.
Okay, thank you. So I'll go back to the speakers list, which actually I had myself on it, and I was just wondering through to staff, and I was hoping it would get seconded because this was relevant to the motion. I didn't see Director Wilson second it, so I guess he doesn't believe that those are supportive, or he's not supportive of those. The question becomes, if both of those options, one does not preclude the other, so 2 and 3 could coexist, because then that would ask Fisher Road Recycling to do some sampling and testing, as well as the group. And those are the two sort of opposite ends of the issue, if I'm correct. And it would be tested through an authorized laboratory, and QEPs would be involved?
Mr. Chair, just to clarify, the QEPs are being used by Fisher Road Recycling for their monitoring obligations under their organic material regulation permit that they have for their facility. The improvement district samples would be taken by their professional staff that they have on staff to take the samples. The samples will be uploaded to the laboratory and then to the provincial database.
Thank you. Okay, and sorry, did you have a follow-up question, or was that what you needed to know? Anyone? Okay, I have Director Salmon. Did you want to speak to it? Thank you.
Option 2 has the improvement district with some funding by the CVRD. That one, when we had the delegate, the head of the improvement district here offering to do that, it seemed a good way forward. I think the perception of bias would be less from the improvement district than by the company. So I'd like to move option 2.
That's been moved by Director Salmon.
Just 2.
Let's not try and change some. He's moved number 2. We can come back. Seconded by Director Marsh. We have option 2 on the floor. To the motion, Director Nicholson.
I'd like clarification. Is this $1,000 or $4,000?
$4,000 for 2 years. Through to staff, just for clarification on the costs. On the motion, yes.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, the difference is the basic suite of parameters versus a full suite of parameters. And what I'll clarify for the committee is that we have been, and I've advised the committee this many times, we've been working with the Cobble Hill Interagency Task Group, which involves the Ministry of Environment, the Ministry of Forest Lands, Natural Resource Operations and Rural Development, and Island Health, all who have jurisdiction and responsibility and mandates for pollution prevention, safe drinking water. The CVRD plays one role in this group. It has been recommended by the professionals on the Cobble Hill Interagency Task Group that we continue to do a full suite of parameters so that the consistent monitoring that we did previously is repeated and can be analyzed moving forward. And we appreciate that there's a desire on the part of the community that's not necessary, and that we stay with the basic suite of parameters. So that's the difference between those two, and leave it to you for your direction.
Follow up, Director Nicholson?
Well, I just want clarification. So my understanding is option 3 would be the full suite of parameters?
Mr. Chair, I'd have to refer to staff to answer that question. I don't.
Mr. Warich.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through to you. So Fisher Road Recycling, through their ministry permit, they're required to do or to complete 2 sampling on their property. They have volunteered themselves to complete the 4 CVRD monitoring wells. That's in question. We've also approached them if they're willing to also include the inorganic. So that means the full suite, organic and inorganic, because the question is that as per previous reports at Fisher Road Recycling, the belief is that they have the contamination from inorganic. So the signature that they get is from another property, not on their property. So it's prudent to do full suite, and they have spoken to us. It's a matter of confirmation with them because that's an additional cost and a volunteer cost.
Okay, thank you. So I do have a bit of a speakers list, and I just want to make, do you have another supplemental?
No, I just want clarification on this point. So what I'm hearing is that they would do the full suite, but it would cost some money. So it wouldn't be $0 to CVRD.
Are you talking about option 3 now? Option 2's been moved.
I'm talking about option 3.
Oh, okay.
Through to you, Mr. Chair, thank you. So Fisher Road will complete, again, so I should not be speaking on their behalf. This is something that the previous information that we've spoken to Fisher Road, and we said, can you do full suite on your own cost? And they said they will be able to do it. Once we have this, let's say this, we have a board direction or committee direction that we need to confirm that number 3, we will go back to Fisher Road and we will confirm that they can do it. We're still not talking about the professional report. That's just the sampling of that. Yeah. And so the simple answer, from this report, they will cover all costs.
So for clarity, what the motion we have on the floor, though, is option 2. Okay. We can discuss other options. I had Director Salmon, Morrison, Acton, and then back to Director Wilson.
Just to clarify, option 2, I meant the full suite option 2.
No, yes, so that's the clarity that I was seeking. Option 2 was with full suite, so that would be $4,000 cost. Is that per year for 2 years or for 2 years inclusive? Okay, per year for 2 years. Thank you. I will go, Director Salmon, you're good? Director Morrison, and then Acton, then Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not going to support option 2, and I want to say that at the budget meeting last night, there were a number of concerned Cobble Hill residents, and I heard about a number of the items mentioned in the various options and concerns, the bias. I just don't see another option but for paid for sub-regionally and regionally through the drinking water watershed protection function, shared or whatever percentages. There's a perceived bias. There is a concern about the full suite, partial suite, basic suite. I think this has to be put in the hands of a third-party individual or third-party professional. And I don't know what Director Wilson's thinking is around this, but I don't see an unfettered, acceptable option other than 4. So I can't support 2.
Thank you. And just for clarity, Director Morrison, option 4, thank you for pointing that out, would be that, and when we're talking about bias, we're worried that if one side does it of the issue, their report will be seen by the others or by Ministry of Environment as bias. If the other side does it, then the community may see it as being biased. Thank you. Okay, so I think I have that figured out. I have Director Axon, then Director Wilson. Now remember, we do have option 2 on the floor. If Director Wilson, if you want to deal with that question before you speak on the item again, if you would like to make a motion, maybe I'll call the question before, but I'll let Director Acton go and then I'll come to you.
Okay, well, that might negate my question. My question for number 2 was all of the testing results, where do they go and who owns them? Like, so that, you know, all agencies have access to it. Is it shared to like a common database, or where does that information go?
Mr. Warch.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through to you. So 2 of the wells that they're required by the Ministry of Environment to report it to them. We've also spoken to them about the submission of the results, so the results may be available for full suite.
Where is it? So, for example, you know, our Shawnigan Research Group, they are very interested in studying these kinds of things, and they might go and look for it. And is it all public? Is it all found in one place, no matter who does it, whether the ministry does it or whether the community group does it? So all that data, where is it?
So through to you, Mr. Chair, I would say that if we go to the option for Fisher Road Recycling to complete that, that's an all volunteer one. So if we have the direction, we will be in touch with them so that, you know, not a verbal thing, but we will ask that question that these are the requirements, can you do it? So that's why you have it in front of you. So if you direct us to go that way, we will confirm that.
I'm asking for number 2. For number 2, where's all the data at the end of it? So if we invest in this data, is it public? Where is it stored? And is it reliable?
So the option number 2, if we go with CHID, that's so with what will happen in future. In the past, the data is available. The only thing for the privacy, we had redacted the emails and the actual addresses of the homes for the whole study, but the data was available.
Thank you. Okay. We have a motion on the floor. Director Wilson, do you want to speak to this? Okay, so let's keep it to the motion and then I'll come back to you.
That's option 2 is the motion.
Yes.
I can't support that one at all. Given what has been put forward by Director Morrison, and I thank him for that one, I would be in favour of defeating this option number 2 and moving on to the suggestion by Director Morrison, but I can't support this one. One of the things I would like to say, if I can please, about full sampling. It's very nice to have it and everything else, thank you very much. The key indicator on any contamination is nitrate levels. That's the one. It doesn't matter what else is there. If you can monitor nitrate and nitrate alone, you know that something is either happening or not happening. Let me take an example here. If you get pulled across by the police and they get you to blow into their little bag, are they interested, A, in the alcohol level, or are they interested in whether you were drinking whiskey or gin or vodka? They're not. They're interested in one thing and one thing only, alcohol level in your bloodstream. This is the same thing. This is nitrate within the water column, within the aquifer, and it is a key indicator. So let's get that bit straight. It's very nice to have the full suite, but the nitrate indicator is just as good, and then you can go from there.
Thank you. So, and just to interject, and I'm going to go to Director Marsh, and then hopefully we can call the question on this one. My understanding was the full suite allows them to more specifically pinpoint the source, right? Because there's other indicators in the samples that if they do the full suite of testing, they may be able to say which contaminant or source it's likely to come from. So yeah, and I think sometimes when we're talking about things like this, shut up, Aaron. I'm going to go to Director Marsh. I'm going to try and call the question on this because I feel there may be an appetite for a different Director Marsh and then Director Nicholson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Regards option 2, Director Morrison said something to me or to the board that made me wonder where option 2's funding would be coming from. When you say CVRD, is it the communities involved, i.e., I think it's A, B, C?
So I'll put that through to staff. What function would that funding come from?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So how I can respond is that all previous expenditures for this project have come out of the South Cowichan Water Study Service. It's funded by A, B, C, and D.
Okay.
Thank you.
Then I think I heard, but maybe it's not appropriate to ask this at this time. So I support this motion.
Thank you. Director Nicholson.
Yeah, I support this motion. Insofar as it's done by qualified professionals, so I feel it's probably not a problem. I don't understand why we wouldn't throw in option 3, because it allows you to check on the reliability of the results that you're getting, and it would be of no cost. And those options, option 2 and 3, or just even option 2, certainly saves the CVRD taxpayers a significant amount of money. So I actually don't understand why we would go for the CVRD funding option 4.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Director Wilson, then I'll call the question on this. Go ahead, Director Wilson.
I still don't understand why we're talking about money here. I don't. I'm sorry. This is about the safety of 15,000 people. Let's stop arguing about who pays what.
Thank you. I'm going to call the question on option 2. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion is defeated. Do you want all the hands, or for committee you just need the numbers? Thank you. I will go to, I see Director Wilson, and he's next on my list. Director Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to go back to option number 4, as suggested by Director Morrison. 750 grand is in the watershed protection area. There's plenty of money there. There's money in function 530. We could use some of that. I have grants and aid money, and finance is presently checked. If I have to use all my grants and aid money, I will do that. But right now, I am going to move option 4 be accepted, and the funding model we will discuss. There is money available.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's been seconded by Director Morrison to option 4. Director Yanni DiNardo.
Thank you. Since Area D, this is part of a budget for us as well, I'd just like to confirm with option 4, how will this be paid? Partly from the function, the watershed function, and then partly from South Cowichan Water.
Sorry, I'll go to staff for answers to questions.
Mr. Chair, can't answer that question. Director Wilson has proposed that you support option 4 and that you would discuss the funding at a later date. I would suggest to you that you need to deal with the funding now. You need to decide where these funds are coming from. Otherwise, you're just going to prolong the angst over this particular issue. Staff have been very clear to lay out the options that you have for funding: the sub-regional South Cowichan Water Study, Drinking Water and Watershed Protection Service, which I will remind the committee that we are working on a strategic plan for that service as we speak. But those are your options.
Thank you. Before I go back to my speakers list that keeps getting longer, just some clarity again on number 2. It says $20,000 for 2 years. Is that $20,000 per year or for both years? I'm talking option 4 has been. Sorry, option 4 has been moved, so it says $20,000 for 2 years. Is that the 2-year total, $10,000 per year for 2 years? Yes. Okay, thank you. I will go back to my speakers list. I have, I think, Director Marsh, Acton, Morrison. Before I go, and I'll come back to Director Wilson, I'm just going to make a statement because I think that this is, you know, Director Wilson, I don't usually get along on most things when it comes to money, but again, I'd be happy to take $10,000 out of the drinking water and watershed protection budget each year for 2 years to do this. This is peace of mind, and if we want really validated samples that we can fight with the Ministry of Environment on, I think we need to be as clear as possible, and if that is the option that gives us qualified professionals that can help us make our case and continue to press, you know, the option one would still be part of our ongoing work, but at least for the 2 years, people cannot necessarily rest easy, but know that the work is being done to make sure that we are protecting them and having a case that we can take forward. So that's my little speech on it. I'll go to Director Marsh and then Acton.
Just a point of order. Is
yes.
that a suggested amendment or addition?
No,
to the
it was
motion?
just
okay.
no. I was putting it forward that, you know, however we fund it. Okay, so I'll go to Director Marsh, Acton, Morrison, and then back to Director Wilson.
So, I'd like to hear from staff if there is. I understood that the Drinking Water Watershed Protection Fund had a work plan, strategic things were being developed, and it was only for funding certain things because it's a limited amount of money. I mean, it sounds like a lot of money, but I was on the board when the original figure was suggested, and it was, I believe, twice the figure. So the board went for this figure. So through to you, to whoever staff could answer, would this be taking money from something else that's part of the plan for that money in this next 2 years?
Mr. Carruthers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I would suggest, given the point in time that we're at, that you would be budgeting in 2020 to undertake this work, in which case you have not maxed out your requisition. You would simply be budgeting for this work to take place.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the second thing, and I guess this is how we how are we going to figure out how to best utilize that money for the highest good? I was at a budget meeting in North Cowichan last night where a member of the public of North Cowichan said that they thought that something that we were going to do on Quamachin Lake should come from the Drinking Water and Watershed Protection Fund. And the person that was speaking at that meeting sort of, yeah, you know, and I had to put my hand up and say, I think there's a plan for that money. Again, as I say, the highest and best use. And if every lake in Lake Cowichan or North Cowichan that needed some help had to get money from that fund, or any other lake or body of water in this very large region, I'm not sure we'll be able to do with that fund what it was meant to do.
Thank you.
Am I right, Mr. Carruthers, or am I mistaken?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just to clarify, you have a drinking water and watershed protection function that is currently a community and technical task group are working hard with a facilitator to make recommendations back to this board as to the future direction of that service. I think there's a lot of expectation on that service from a variety of constituencies around the regional district, and you're going to have some difficult times prioritizing where those funds get expended. And so we have been cautious about not entertaining funding decisions other than some basic monitoring, some overhead costs, until such time as the board's had a chance to contemplate those recommendations from your task group. That's the challenge that you have, but the board has the service in front of them, and they also have the South Cowichan Water Service. It is very much a decision you have to make around how you set policy as a board for funding this.
So if I may have one last follow-up.
Yeah, we've got a long speakers list, and I would like to be able to get to them, but another supplemental.
Okay, so I think I heard that the decision to fund needs to be now, but the decision of where to fund will come at some later date. Am I right, Mr. Carruthers?
Sorry, need clarity on your question?
The decision whether or not to support this, you were asking for direction today. The decision of where to get this funds will happen at a later date.
So, Mr. Chair, I would suggest to the committee that if you're going to approve making an expenditure, that you determine where you're making that expenditure from. If you have to come back and do another round of where you're going to be spending that money, you're just going to prolong this. You need to make a decision. You need to decide now where you're going to fund it.
So for me, based on my understanding of the purpose of that $750 and the number of bodies of water in the region, I can't support this if it's going to come through that.
It's not part of the motion that's on the floor at the moment. There's no funding mechanism in the motion on the floor.
So we would vote for this and then go through the battle.
We would have to, because we have not provided that direction, or amend the motion that's on the floor.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, and I appreciate your interpretation, but when we call it the Drinking Water and Watershed Protection Service, and we don't imagine that through the use of that function there won't be contamination issues that are specific to areas within the region that we need to fund, then I would question why we have this money being requisitioned in the first place, because there isn't going to be a contamination source that's going to contaminate all of our drinking water at one time. So if we call it the Drinking Water and Watershed Protection Service, when we have contamination, we should be prepared to allocate funds for that to address the contamination, is my perspective. I appreciate yours, thank you. But well, I've made mine. We have a speakers list. I interjected myself as the chair. If you'd like to speak to it again, we can put you at the end. I was just sharing my perspective, and you just shared yours. Moving on to Director Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to bring a bit of a broader perspective to this, in that this has been a very long affair. It's caused great angst in the community. We created the Drinking Water and Watershed Protection Function not specifically to address this. I had suggested in earlier remarks that it seemed to me appropriate that the local communities of A, B, C, and D could fund a portion of this, that the Drinking Water and Watershed Protection Function could provide some funding for a portion of this. I too am prepared to, if it's allowed, to contribute through my grant and aid. It's in scope. When SIA was underway and that community came to this board and said, please help us, we were all in. And this is about a community that's coming and saying, we've waited long enough. The answer from the province is no, please help. $20,000 to have a clean, unbiased, full suite is a bargain in my mind. And we're fighting over the nickels and dimes. So I think that given we're spending money on bylaw enforcement in the tens of thousands of dollars, it's time to settle on getting this done. And I think there's a way to fund this that will be reasonable to everyone. I think my final point will be, I understand the angst of the directors from A, B, C, and D to activate and fund their local watershed or water function. But it shows a commitment to collaborate and to cost share with the Drinking Water and Watershed Protection Function that could be a model for other types of addressing other types of issues in the future. When the local community puts up a couple of their dollars, then the Drinking Water and Watershed Protection Function could put in a couple of their dollars too. So if we approve this, I will make a subsequent motion that a funding formula be developed. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Director Acton, Wilson, Yanni DiNardo, Salmon, and then I did put you down, Director Marsh, for after that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think Director Wilson mentioned this too. Like, why are we even? I don't understand why we're talking about the funding. I don't even think we should talk about it anymore today. Even us directors haven't had a chance who are in that 5:30 to discuss this. Or staff hasn't suggested that we should just say as a board we want it and let staff come back as to like where it should be, and then we can keep talking about the money. So in principle, I'm going to support number 4, but also I'm still not hearing. about the data. So $20,000, this is information that will belong to the CVRD, in essence belongs to the community. Where is it going to be and how is it going to be accessible? Because that's what I want to know, and I want to know that it's, and where's the partnership with the Ministry of Environment? I think we can say to them, we're doing your work here. We want this posted on MOE. We want the data presented on the Ministry of Environment. We're doing the qualified professional, and then it's stored there forever. And it is a huge resource to all of the communities for data collection. So I would like to know, can that be happen with staff?
Mr. Carruthers.
So all data from this monitoring would be public. It would be publicly available. And I believe all of it would be made available through the ministry website. They encourage all data to be uploaded. The more information we have, the better. So it will all be available either through the CVRD or through the ministry website. And we would also then be contemplating producing a report that actually does some analysis of that data so that we can start to see some trending over time. But it will be available to the public.
And as it is our data, then we could ensure that we're at least posting it, sharing it, and contributing to the ministry as well.
If I can just clarify for the committee, the issues around privacy were around private wells that were being sampled. These are not private wells. These are publicly owned or wells that are required to be monitored through a different regime. So
sure, but sometimes the community, the public is not interested in the CVRD's analysis of it and not providing the data. I would like to know that the raw data is available on the Ministry of Environment site, or at least we do our best so that they are the ones sharing it, and not waiting for them to create a report, but just that data is what they promise from other ministry sites.
I'll reiterate what I said. The raw data will be available, publicly available. Yes.
That's what the CAO just.
Sorry, I just don't
Director
want it to
Acton, please. He said the question was asked and answered. He said all the raw data will be available publicly. We can't force MOE to do it, but if they submit it, yes, thank you. Director Wilson, save us from ourselves.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. All right, so I'm going to ask the rest of this committee to support option number 4. And I'm going to go dramatic on you again here. There it is, right there. $20,000 to protect 15,000 people, and yet this board will be voting on a request for $1.3 million for parkland acquisition. Where's the priorities here? 20 grand ain't that much. Let's stop arguing about it. Get it done. Please support option 4 and any amendments which come with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Yanni DiNardo, then Director Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to, sorry? Okay. Thank you very much. I understood with the water function that the South Cowichan Water Service would then be ending. Then we found out that there wasn't enough in the water function and the South Cowichan Water Service continued. I would really like to make an amendment that 10,000 comes from the South Cowichan Water Service and 10,000 from the water function.
The amendment is in order. Do we have a seconder? Director Wilson, seconded. I saw a lot of hands, so now we're on the amendment. I just want to be clear for everyone. I do have a speakers list, but I'll go to a speakers list on the amendment. If we really feel we need speakers, put your hand up. Director Nicholson.
I'd like clarification. So we're talking about the sampling, and Mr. Carruthers has talked about the report that analyzes the sampling results. So we aren't talking about just $20,000. We're talking about $30,000.
Sorry, I think that was option 5, Director, Mr. Carruthers. Can you clarify?
With the 30, sorry.
Mr. Chair, I'm going to refer to staff. I'm just looking through the report, but they may be able to answer that question quicker than I can.
The option 4 clearly says 20,000.
Yeah.
Mr. Warch.
Through to you, Mr. Chair. Yes, that there'll be another additional $10,000 for the report.
So you're talking about the hydrological interpretation of sample results. Okay, so that wasn't under option 4. It was under option 5, so I thought that was part of option 5. But you're saying that would be another necessary item.
Yeah, that is correct.
after 2 years. Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, could I amend my motion to 15 and 15 then, if it's going to be
So
30,000?
I'll give one moment. Director Nicholson, does that answer your question? Do you have a supplemental? Okay, it answers. Okay, thank you. We're going to keep going on this until it's done and then we can eat? There may be some motivation. Sorry, there's a long list, Director Acton, so you'll have to get at the back end of that long list. We're on the amendment again, so I would suggest, I don't know, Ms. Legault, if you would agree that let's not amend the amendment, maybe defeat the amendment, and I'll come back to you. So I'll put the amendment to the committee, and then I'll go back to Director Yanni DiNardo. I'll call the question on the amendment. All those in favor? It's 10,000 from South Cowichan and 10,000 from the Drinking Water and Watershed Protection Service. So Director Yanni DiNardo wants to amend it to include the funding, I believe, for the hydrological modeling and report. Calling the question on the amendment. All those in favor? Opposed? The amendment fails. Going back to Director Yanni DiNardo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to move that, amend 15,000 from South Cowichan Water Service and 15,000 from the water function.
Drinking Water Watershed Protection Service. Up to.
Up to.
Thank you. Seconded by Director Staples. Discussion on that amendment. Okay, Director Acton. I can't believe we still need more discussion.
Well, I just don't understand why we have to come up with the funding model. Why are we not having staff?
Sorry,
But
can we order, please?
I need to, well, I'm
feel
going to
like
vote against it because I need to see, we need to look at what are we doing under that function as a whole, not
Thank
just
you.
adding stuff right now.
Thank you. Director Staples, on the amendment.
Yes, on the amendment. So if the taking the money from those two functions, if staff doesn't feel when they're going through that that's the most appropriate thing to do, my question is then would staff come back to us with other options if that wasn't exactly what would work out? So that just to give us that freedom that I think is being asked at the ability to change where those funds come from if necessary. So is that something, Mr. Crothers, or sorry, Chair, through to staff?
Through to staff. This is.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I was having a sideline.
I know, I saw that. I was
repeat
trying to
question?
bust you on it. Would you like to share that with the rest of the class? So the question was, if staff feels there's a more appropriate way to fund it, would they come back to when it comes to the board with an alternative recommendation for funding? Is that correct? Was that the intent? Yes. So the amendment on the floor.
It was up to, sorry,
Yeah.
it was up to 15,000 from each. So that's why I'm asking, so that we can move forward and call the question and then recognize that there may be some, minor changes necessary, but that staff would bring those back to us. That's my question.
So, Mr. Chair, if staff felt there was some compelling reason why we would suggest something alternatively, we would bring that back. But the decision is yours to make now, and yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so again, on the amendment, do we have any more speakers to the amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? None opposed, the amendment carries. Going back to the original motion as amended, that option 4 be selected with $15,000 to come from each of the South Cowichan Water Function and the Drinking Water and Watershed Protection Service. Is there discussion on the motion as amended? I can't believe this. Haven't we beat this to death? I've got Directors Salmon, Staples, and Nicholson. Director Salmon.
Thank you. Just concerned about timing, given the urgency of this in the community. Do we have a date when that first test would happen and the results actually be available to the public, an approximate date?
Through staff.
I'm going to refer to staff for that question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Show us the money, we'll get it done right away.
Thank you. Director Staples.
maybe in the flurry of all of the changes that have been happening, I must have missed this, but I just wanted to clarify that because it's not in option 4, the additional $10,000
Yes.
for that report.
Sorry,
so
I was
just
gonna
wanted
bring-
to make sure that that was included. That was all. So
I was going to say
thank you for your patience,
Thank
everyone.
you. Yeah. No, I believe that that I was going to say that we should make an additional motion, though, just to be very clear. Thank you. Director Nicholson.
So I'm a little bit concerned about this option 4 because it's going to cost us, or it's going to cost CVRD taxpayers $30,000, and it's going to set a precedent and expectations. And if after 2 years you find results that are alarming, you are going to want to continue this sampling. So it will the cost will continue. So how we fund it is actually very important, because if we have 2 or 3 of these things starting to pop up all over the region, we're going to run out of drinking water protection money for what I think are probably more broad regional needs that we need to deal with. So we haven't had that discussion. So we are setting a precedent, and I think we need to be careful here.
Thank you. Do we have any more discussions on the motion as amended? Mr. Crothers.
I just need to provide some clarity. As I mentioned earlier, what you're putting forward would be for 2020. I was just consulting with Mr. Werich. You would require a budget amendment for 2019. We are in the final 2 months of our budget. I don't believe that's problematic. If the board approves this, we will start the procurement process and we will be ready to go as soon as the budget is adopted for 2020 and have that sampling done. I just didn't want to leave the committee with an impression that we would be going out next month. This would be subject to the 2020 budget, and you're making a recommendation to the 2020 budget process, as I mentioned earlier.
Thank you. For clarity, I think with a procurement process timeline, by the time it's awarded, it would probably be into the new budget year. So it probably first samples take place after the new year kind of thing. Thank you. Oh, Lordy. I'm trying to, but sorry, I'm going to ask Ms. Legault, do I have any power here to just limit debate and move on? I think because we're asking questions 3 and 4 times now, but I'll go back Director Marsh and then Director Taylor, and then I'll call the question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Mr. Crothers. If I heard you correctly, this is just to move this along, and there'll be more information during budget time, at which time the board may choose a different way to fund. Is that what you're saying?
No, Madam Chair, or Mr. Chair, you're making a recommendation to the board. This is a budget decision, and it will be included in the 2020 budget for consideration under these 2 functions.
Okay, thank you.
Director Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just very briefly, I would say this project strikes me as something that is valid under that drinking water area, and not keen on the whole idea of putting that budget together, but I think this is maybe a project that fits reasonably well from my perspective. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Motion carries. Quick question from Director Morrison.
Just would like to test the thought of the board of committee about bringing this forward to today's board meeting for ratification.
So before we do that, though, I think I was going to ask for a motion on that other piece, which was that the additional cost of the hydrological interpretation of sample results be included in the funding that was previously approved. Okay, so it's been moved by Director Wilson and seconded by Director Yanni DiNardo. Sure. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? None opposed, motion carries. And now,
do we want to consider this at the board meeting this afternoon? Yes. Okay. Do we have time? Just ask the staff make best efforts to bring it forward this afternoon.
Do we need a motion for that, though? Because our policies now, so we'd need a motion to, staff's waving at me, through to finance.
Function 532 is actually coming forward this afternoon, after this meeting resumes. So if the board could make a motion to consider it during the board meeting, that would be helpful so that we could include the funding.
Director Morrison's, or actually, did we? Yes, moved and seconded by Director Yanni DiNardo. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Motion carries. We will break for lunch. So we're going to adjourn this meeting until after the board. Thank you. Get a motion? Director Morrison, Director Yanni DiNardo. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Motion carries.